From the late 1980s till now, amid the collapsing Soviet Union, the mountains of Nagorno-Karabakh became a flashpoint as Armenian and Azerbaijani communities, long intertwined, ignited in a conflict over identity, land, and survival in a way that would spark one of the most bitter post-Soviet wars. What began with protests in Yerevan demanding transfer of the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast from Azerbaijan to Armenia escalated when armed clashes broke out and nationalist fervor spread. The Soviet apparatus tried to quell unrest, but authority evaporated, and by 1991, as both Armenia and Azerbaijan declared independence, the small, heavily Armenian region of Nagorno-Karabakh asserted its own claim to secede from Azerbaijan. Full-scale war erupted, marked by siege warfare. Shusha, Khojaly, villages emptied, hundreds of thousands displaced, tens of thousands dead, and the international community watching helplessly. Frozen lines emerged in 1994 as a ceasefire brokered by Russia took effect, but it froze only the front lines, not the enmity. For over 2 decades, small skirmishes, mine incidents, civil displacement, and stalled peace efforts maintained simmer. Armenia consolidated its control over Nagorno-Karabakh and adjacent Azerbaijani districts, but Baku never relinquished its claim, insisting on territorial integrity. Ceasefire violations periodically flared, but no side could seize decisive advantage. International mediators. OSCE Minsk Group, co-chaired by Russia, the US, and France, shuttled back and forth amid declarations of peace, yet made no lasting difference. In April 2016, the 4-day war broke the relative calm, with tanks and aircraft deployed across the front line, dozens killed, and a reminder that the conflict could ignite again with lethal force. No peace followed. Then in 2020, Armenia and Azerbaijan plunged into full-scale warfare again, even more destructive. Drones from Turkey's Bayraktar TB2 fleets targeted armored columns. Precision-guided missiles devastated infrastructure. Civilians in cities like Ganja came under fire, and frontline lines shifted rapidly. After weeks of fighting, Azerbaijan reclaimed key territories lost in the 1990s. Russian peacekeepers brokered a ceasefire in November 2020, inserting themselves as guarantors of the transit corridor through Lachen and freezing the conflict once more, but under conditions favoring Baku. Amid this devastation, the human cost was immense. Thousands more dead, tens of thousands better, rubble across Karabakh and surrounding cities. Armenians mourned lost lands and families. Azerbaijanis hailed regained sovereignty and resented the continued presence of Russian troops. The region drifted back into uneasy quiet. Elsewhere in the Caucasus, geopolitics churned. Turkey flaunted influence in Baku. Russia leaned on Armenia via its base in Gyumri. Iran watched warily along its borders. Western powers held distant interest. Into this volatile mix stepped the United States in a way it had not before. The Trump administration, viewing the Caucasus as a pivot zone for energy, security, and influence, dispatched envoys who worked quietly in diplomacy rooms in Geneva, Vienna, and Washington. Behind guarded doors, American negotiators brought Armenia and Azerbaijan to the table, setting aside the ghosts of war to discuss peace in measured terms. "We must end this carnage," said one Armenian negotiator at a late-night session, while the Azerbaijani counterpart replied, "Peace cannot await forever." After weeks of back and forth, an agreement was drafted for phased withdrawal of forces, access corridors secured, and a joint humanitarian commission established. In a climactic announcement, Armenia's prime minister and the Azerbaijani president appeared before international press outlets, each declaring that U.S. President Donald Trump deserved recognition, some even saying he deserved a Nobel Peace Prize for facilitating the deal that changed decades of stalemate. The moment spread rapidly across headlines worldwide, unexpected and dramatic, as both leaders stood side by side in press footage, a reminder of how rare such unity had been. The global reaction varied. Diplomats praised the breakthrough. Analysts debated the durability. Human rights advocates urged protection for displaced civilians. And skeptics warned that without addressing the status of Karabakh, this was only a fragile cessation of hostilities. For Armenia, some saw it as a heartbreaking but necessary compromise. For Azerbaijan, as vindication. Meanwhile, Turkey celebrated its allies' gains. Russia watched from the sidelines. Iran noted its reduced influence. The EU called for reconciliation and reconstruction aid. Yet the deal left unresolved questions. What would be the political status of Nagorno-Karabakh? Would Armenian communities there be guaranteed rights and security? Could displaced persons return? What was the long-term role of peacekeepers? Many voiced concern that this was not peace, but a pause, fragile and precarious. Along remote mountain roads and near minefields, patrols remained tense, while in displaced camps, families waited. In Yerevan and Baku, political factions clashed over the agreement's implications. In the capitals of Western powers, officials eyed the Caucasus warily, uncertain if this détente would hold or collapse under old grievances. Underneath the public optimism lay a buried fear that ambition, nationalism, or broken trust could trigger another round of violence. And so the region stands, years of bloodshed trailing behind, a signed agreement now signed and delivered by the U.S., by one man who rarely featured in such diplomacy, yet found himself at the center of it. Donald Trump, the U.S. president who suddenly was praised across ancient fault lines. But beyond the ceremony and headlines, the small villages and battle-scarred towns of Karabakh, the displaced families living in tents or rented rooms, the Russians guarding transit corridors, the anxious citizens on both sides. None know whether peace has finally taken root or whether their silence is only the breath before the next storm. Is this the dawn of lasting peace in the South Caucasus, or merely a fragile pause in a centuries-old rivalry? History is full of battles, but the greatest one is keeping their stories alive. Subscribe now and never miss the moments that change the world.